Welcome to the AUANews Inside Tract Podcast. On today's episode, Dr. Rosalyn Adam, a cell biologist and biochemist at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, talks with Dr. Kristian Stensland, a urologic oncologist and health services researcher at the University of Michigan and the VA Ann Arbor healthcare system, about the AUA's most recent Early-Career Investigator Workshop.
Welcome. My name is Dr. Rosalyn Adam from Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. I'm joined today by Dr. Kristian Stensland from the University of Michigan. Dr. Stensland was my mentee during the most recent Early-Career Investigator Workshop hosted by the AUA Office of Research. This workshop focused on teaching early career investigators grant writing skills, especially for applying to federally funded grant programs. Today, we're going to be talking about urology research and grant writing. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Stensland.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Nice to see you again and have a chance to kind of debrief our experience. Appreciate it.
Great. So maybe to kick off, how would you explain or describe your research area to an audience that is unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. And it's something that I think will be relevant to my experience at the Early Career Investigator Workshop specifically. And that's my research focuses a lot on improving the conduct, efficiency, and equity of our clinical trials, mostly through implementation science. So the main problem that I'm trying to address through my work is trying to improve how we conduct our clinical trials. We know that they're super effective and we rely on them for generating new science, but unfortunately a lot of our clinical trials fail to reach their primary endpoints, primarily secondary to enrollment. And so what my research focuses on is using implementation science techniques primarily to analyze how our clinical trials work and how we can develop new strategies through implementation science frameworks to make them run better and then reach new populations of people who have been historically underrepresented in clinical trials.
Great. And I suspect you were a little surprised to be paired with a basic scientist who knows nothing about clinical trials, but maybe that brings us into the next part of the podcast. So how do grants and grant writing impact your career and research at this stage?
It's a good question. I mean, as you move forward, you obviously have to get grants to fund your whole body of work. But in getting into the sort of spin or the feel of writing grants to support your time, so you have the time to develop and really delve deeply into addressing these bigger problems, particularly for a new field like implementation science. It's really important to have the time and the resources available to protect your time, particularly as a clinician, where you need to be able to support yourself so that you can take the time out from just seeing patients and doing surgeries to really delve deeply into the science. And so getting external grant funding to support and protect that time is important. And for me, particularly as an early career investigator, getting a career development award like a K award in the NIH parlance is really important so that I can protect a significant portion of my time early on and develop the skills that I need to transition into being an independent investigator and getting the larger grants that will be able to build a team and build out science as well.
Great. Yes, it's definitely a challenge, certainly for surgeon scientists who are trying to balance clinical responsibilities with really the time needed to be creative and put a grant together. So as we've noted, you were my mentee during the AUA Early Career Investigator Workshop. What were your biggest grant writing takeaways after completing the program?
Yeah, and I think this harkens back a lot to what you said before. So being paired, I'm very much on the edge of health services research and implementation science, and having input from folks outside of my own institution was big. We have great resources at Michigan that are specific to health services research, but being able to communicate things to someone who is not in my area of expertise and who is not familiar with my work already was highly valuable to me. Because as you know, but maybe folks who are not as familiar with grant work as I was not before I came to fellowship, you really have to pitch to people who have a very limited time to be able to make it through your, normally just your specific aims page, but through your grant in general. And so if you can't communicate effectively and very rapidly to be understood, to be impactful at sort of the basics of your science, then it's not going to land and it won't be scored well. At least that's my understanding. And so it was highly valuable to get feedback from multiple people in a setting where you don't have the time to go really in depth and explain your entire, hopefully years of research, but if not, at least the concepts of it. And instead have to say, how do I refine my message and how do I get that across? So in the 3 to 5 minutes that people are going over your page, that it really lands well. So that for me was particularly helpful. But I think also just being exposed to so many other people's science and the way they're communicating that and sort of taking bits and pieces away. Even though there was a lot of translational science, that doesn't mean it's not relevant to what we're doing in health services research. And similarly, having that exchange of ideas with folks was very helpful. There was also this great session of doing sort of your elevator pitches for the people who are in the more advanced group. And I think it's always very interesting to see how people pitch their aims and trying to think through the process of what can you take from the sort of oral and conversational pieces of how you pitch your work and then translating that back to your written work. And, where is the disconnect between that, where people understand it when you explain it, but maybe not when you write it. And particularly as an early grant writer, I struggle with that a lot. And so that is when something very helpful, both through this workshop and just getting feedback from other people, that's been really, I hope, influential.
Yes, I think, you touch on a really good point there, and not all information is equally valuable when you're delivering your elevator pitch. And also the point that you made about writing for the generalist, not the implementation scientist that you know so well. So would you recommend the ECIW to others? And if so, why would you do so?
Yeah, I would. And I think, there are probably people, at least through discussing with my peers who are at the workshop, there's a whole range of experiences, I think, with grant writing. And there are some people coming from institutions with not a lot of support, and some people, like I'm very fortunate to come from some place with lots of resources. And I think there's something for everyone to take away from that. And I know there's, more information on how it will be split between sort of the early and advanced groups, where at least when we did it, there were sort of different levels of folks. But I think from just being introduced to the different mechanisms and the different sort of funding sources and opportunities to even just how to structure your grants or how to structure a specific aims page is great from one end all the way up to refining how you tailor to different contexts of who's going to be reading your grants. I really think there's something for every possible investigator there. And I imagine going forward too, for even people on the other end of things, just being exposed to new investigators and new fields of science and things. I think there's a lot to be gleaned from that type of collaborative spirit in general. So I would highly recommend it to anyone, but particularly folks who are just kind of starting on the grant writing journey.
Great. I'm curious to know what you thought about the mock study section and essentially how different the process was to what you envisioned it was before you attended the workshop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the mock one was very interesting. I've been exposed to some more, again, sort of the health services side of things, of seeing what a grant review looks like from that aspect. But there's also sort of you get within your own institution or within your own research group and think the way that they think. And so I thought the most illustrative part for me was seeing how reviewers from different institutions would approach grants and sort of, that was a great opportunity for asking questions about things, sort of saying, this is what folks at my institution said, or this is how we have been taught to look at these. How would you, across your different institutions go about that? It was highly valuable also to have so many experienced folks in one room who have been through multiple iterations of both their own grants and sitting on multiple study sections. And this was another example of where, a lot that was reviewed was in kind of the translational or basic science side of things, but lots of little nuggets of knowledge from, framing the way that your objective should be, or sort of little tips and tricks on hypothesis generation and how things might be discussed behind closed doors, I think is all super valuable. But I think just getting the insight into that of saying, here's mechanistically how this works, if you're not familiar with how it works, all the way down to here's something that came up one time in one of my study sections, and this might be a potential hurdle that you'd want to avoid because it's really easy to tweak this language, and it's something that might save you, a resubmission or get you a score instead of, not dissection or not discussed.
Yeah, great. Really interesting reflections. And I agree. I think it's an eye-opening experience if you've never witnessed that before. Just to finish off, is there anything about the ECIW experience that you would like to share as a mentee?
Just in general, I thought it was a fantastic experience. I think as with a lot of these different things, the opportunity to present your work and get feedback, receiving any type of feedback is such a gift from anyone. That's sort of a Jim Monteism of considering all feedback as a gift. And so really engaging with a lot of that and shopping around your grant to as many people as possible can obviously be helpful. But also engaging with different fields of science, I think, can be very beneficial to everybody involved. So I really encourage participation from just about anybody.
Great. Well, it's great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. And we'll kind of flip the script a little bit, or flip the table here, and would love to hear sort of your reflections on your experiences sort of coming to science, and sort of, we talked about my experience with grant writing as a early career investigator, sort of writing my first few grants and things. What is your approach to grants, or what sort of portion of your career now is involved with grant writing?
Oh, it's that's a really good question. It's really a daily preoccupation. Mm-hmm. I am a full-time basic science researcher, and so the expectation is that I am supporting not only my own salary, but the salaries of the people in my group. A large proportion of that support has to come from extramural grants. So for other individuals at soft money institutions, they'll recognize this situation. And so there's relatively little time where I'm not thinking about grant ideas or working on funded research, and therefore thinking about productivity on a specific grant. And so it really is a full-time occupation and preoccupation to consider how we keep our research groups afloat. And so, yes, there's relatively little time when I'm not thinking about it in some way or another.
And how do you split your time when you're developing these grant ideas? There's, of course, sort of your R01 level, large scale individual grants. How much of your time is spent doing that? How much is it in doing mentored type grants? How involved are you with sort of the more you as a more senior mentor with a mentee on grants for you?
Yes, that has varied over the years. I would say a majority of my time is on the R01 or R series type grants. So really to keep the group funded and afloat. I have served as a program director for a T32 for a number of years. And that's a very different kind of role to both to write those grants and to oversee them and implement them. Most of my mentored grants have actually been through the AUA and Urology Care Foundation. And that's really just a reflection of the types of people that we train. We train a lot of clinical urology fellows, and it's really gratifying to help them develop their ideas and put together a proposal. So I would say it's probably about an 80-20 split in terms of investigator-initiated grants, the R-type grants. We have a couple of DoD-funded proposals, versus the mentored grants, such as the Research Scholar Awards.
And how did you, there's such a huge world of grants and different, societies and philanthropic groups, and of course, NIH and other government groups. And there are some common threads about writing grants and then all these other sort of peripheral things that you learn. What type of resources did you use, and what was sort of your approach to learning how to do both that core grantsmanship, basically grantspersonship, and then also the periphery? Where did you go to learn about that? And are there any specific resources that you used and found helpful, or that your mentees find useful in learning about grant writing and grantspersonship in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I was hugely fortunate to train with someone who I would consider an expert grant writer, but who himself struggled early on and didn't really have anybody helping him to put together grants and have them competitive in review. And so I owe any of the grant writing skills, if you like, to my mentor, Michael Freeman. And I try to pay that forward really to the mentees. So certainly I was very, very fortunate to have essentially one-on-one mentoring. So I was involved in grants written by my mentor early on. I would maybe write pieces of the grant, methodological pieces. I also had a colleague, Tim Ratliff, who recommended that I participate in a study section through the VA. And actually reviewing grants was an incredibly valuable way to learn how to write grants. Because I think it's a mystery when you're starting out. What is a grant? What does it look like? And really the only way to learn that is to read other people's grants. And so I appreciate that access and participation on a study section or a grant review panel is not something you can just sign up for necessarily. And so I was very appreciative of Dr. Ratliff's willingness to recommend me for the VA panel initially. So it's really been a combination of writing my own grants, failing, writing them again, responding to feedback, and participation on grant review panels and study sections that I would say collectively those experiences have hopefully helped me refine my approach. I approach things relatively consistently now, and it really all starts with a good idea. And importantly, you have to share your ideas with your colleagues. So I very much use my colleagues in my institution to help develop the idea. This is really a team science to write grants, even though I think everyone thinks of it as a solitary pursuit. You have to use your colleagues. They can be your initial reviewers for your ideas. I would say most people are willing to read a specific aims page. It should take them maybe 20 minutes. And if they're not convinced in those 20 minutes, then you probably have to go back to the drawing board. And so the proverbial, it takes a village. And you need to use your colleagues and peers to help you refine your ideas. And then obviously there are formal resources through things like the NIH. They have wonderful resources where you can access funded grants. They have a lot of information available to anybody. It's all freely available online. They'll help you navigate the somewhat challenging activity of putting a grant together. These are complicated documents. The science is usually the minor component when all is said and done. So you may have 12 or 13 pages of science in a 100-plus page document. And so all of those other pieces are important as well. So I would say for the non-science components, the NIH has done a wonderful job of making those resources freely available. And so, to sum up, in answer to your question, I've really used a variety of sources of information and people to help me develop a mechanism for writing grants that is somewhat less stressful than it was in the early days.
That's great. Thank you. And it seems like a lot of the things that you were hitting on were sort of well represented at the Early-Career Investigator Workshop. I think sort of pulling back the veil on how the study section works was, highly valuable. Getting a lot of one-on-one feedback as we work together, both leading into the workshop and then at the workshop itself, and being able to iterate through AIMS pages, and then getting feedback on the AIMS page itself was invaluable across all of that. And that's all from my perspective. From your perspective, in addition to those things, what were some other sort of benefits or other, advantages, other highlights of the Early Career Investigator Workshop from your perspective that would be valuable for someone considering participating either as a mentee or as a mentor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the fact that the workshop really spans several months, and so the idea that the applicants are required to work on either an AIMS page or an application beginning probably 2 months before the workshop occurs, I think that really means people have a vested interest in the outcome of the workshop. You develop a relationship with your mentee, and it's really enjoyable then to meet them in person at the workshop and see the evolution of what they've been working on. So typically from sometime in the summer, where we first see the mentee's work, they can make revisions, send us a revised version, and then you get to address any outstanding issues in person at the AUA headquarters. So I think the somewhat longitudinal nature of the workshop, the fact that people are submitting their work ahead of time, is a huge strength. And it means that both parties are engaged and committed to a successful outcome. So I think that's one very important aspect of this. And then just the opportunity to present your work, if you're an advanced group mentee, to a group of individuals that have essentially gone through everything that you're going through. So they've walked the same path of having to figure out a research area, having to come up with a potentially fundable idea, dealing with the challenges, potentially the failures. I think all of the faculty who participate in the workshop are very open about what has and has not worked in terms of putting grants together. And so I think that creates a feeling of empathy. So we're not asking mentees to do anything or to experience anything that we ourselves haven't already gone through. And so I think that's a huge benefit to the participants. There's a sense that we're sort of all in the trenches together.
This is great. Well, thank you again so much, both for your mentorship and for chatting today and helping encourage more folks to be involved and apply to the workshop. I think it was a great benefit to me, as I hope it was for others. And thanks again for all your work and continued mentorship, both inside and out of your institution and the AUA.
Oh, it's a pleasure to do it. And it's one of the most enjoyable things that I think the AUA Office of Research participates in and sets up for all of us, both mentors and mentees. So really great to talk to you today and hear your perspectives.
This has been an AUANews Inside Tract Podcast. For more information about the AUA and to listen to more episodes of this podcast, go to auanet.org.